Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duval, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a dude that's making it real hard for me to do my job. You dig?
Tim Longo. I mean, it's still appropriate, I think. But it goes both ways.
It does. It's true. Yeah. Last week I couldn't do my job because you were out of town, and I actually had a migraine last week on one of the days that threw off my whole week. And then, so I just didn't have time to do really anything. I was happy to not have a podcast, honestly. And sorry we didn't have something in the feed. We still have some interviews from the Discord Game Club that we can get to, but I didn't have the time or bandwidth to do the editing, which is mostly just me reading it to make sure that in the middle they don't start, I don't know, swearing or something like that. I just need
those
to hear
guys.
It. You never know. I mean, come on, a bunch of
trouble.
Trouble is right. We are, speaking of trouble, we've been playing Interstate 76, or at least I have, and we'll talk more about that soon. Tim has had some troubles. You want to run down?
Let's launch into it. Let's launch into it. We've decided that I'm just embracing what has happened. This is what episode I'm looking?
This is the third episode.
424.
Oh yeah,
episodes in how many years? 9 years? Is it 9 now? Almost 9.
It's 9 as of last week.
The week we didn't have a podcast.
No. It was 9 a month ago. I'm sorry, I'm wrong. It was February.
Okay.
February 26th.
That would have been funny. Maybe the anniversary week. Every year we should not do it.
You should just we're taking this week off.
It is. We are recording on April Fool's, by the way, which is also my anniversary, which both of us forgot about. So
wow.
At least both of us forgot.
Yeah.
If I had forgotten,
that is the best of possible worlds. Yeah.
Anyway, it is April Fool's, so maybe it's appropriate that we're recording today, even though you're not listening to it on April Fool's. So I mean, this is the historic event, the first time this has ever happened on this podcast, where I would say technically I didn't actually play the game.
Yeah.
So I did play.
Not didn't finish.
No.
Play. Yeah,
that's legal. That's apparently we're okay with that.
That's street legal.
That's street legal. The reason I said it is I did play some of the game. I think I got 3-ish episodes or 3 missions. Yeah, I got 3 missions in. But I was playing without the sort of the physics bug fixing in because I never got that running. The reason that I gave up is what I realized at one point. And Brett even came and helped me, and we did screen sharing and went through the same process to see if I'd missed a step, and it seemed like I was doing everything correctly, even though I had done it like 4 or 5 times at that point. That was my maybe 5th time. So I think I probably spent more time technically troubleshooting this than I did playing the game. To try to get the physics.
It wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, I think it was probably about, I'd thought about it over the course of the last 3 weeks or whatever. It was probably about 4-ish hours. And it probably only took me 2 or so to play. I did play the training and kind of fooled around a bit. And I had to replay because I lost my saves. I had to start the game over, even to play the janky version again to get to the 3 missions. So once I couldn't, there was a section where the physics were so bad I really couldn't even proceed, to be honest. So the reason I say I didn't even play the game is I didn't play the game the way it's supposed to be played. I didn't experience it correctly. And I was like, I can't put more time into debugging this than playing.
Yeah.
It's got demoralized, And so we talked about it last episode. I think, there is an important topic here if I can spin it somehow into a positive, which is a very thin rationale, that there is an important message here. Brett's going to read a mail in a second, but that we talked about of like, how do you play old games when there is nobody supporting them? And it's preservation, to some degree, but also just like, and there's abandonware sites and there's kind of ways to do it. But I tried 4 different approaches Two of which,
on 3 different machines.
yeah, if you count the Steam Deck, 3 different machines, and the machines are all wildly different. There isn't like a common CPU or graphics card or anything. I think one is AMD and one's NVIDIA even. So it's like even chipsets. So it's just very frustrating. And anybody, hopefully if others tried to
I
play.
mean, you don't even have a commonality of an operating system. It's like you weren't
Right.
even trying to run the same operating system on all 3. Although,
Right.
granted, you were trying to simulate that on the Steam Deck, but still.
Yeah. But I mean, so expecting different results would have been at least a positive, right? It's like, oh, I'm getting kind of, yeah. So that's why I thought it was user error. But anyway, long story short, we're here now. We debated whether to even what to do, and I'm bummed because I could see that I would like what if it was working properly. I would like the game. It's right up my alley, and I know you took some steps to make it even, I think, cooler. So I want to hear about that.
Yeah.
But so long story short, I didn't play. I mean, I didn't really play because what I was playing was so broken. I didn't get the full experience. I could see the tone and I saw the cutscenes and I really appreciate all that stuff. And we talked about that in the first episode. So it's like redundant, but yeah. So yeah, first time. I don't.
I think what just the takeaway has to be, the game should be still playable. I think that's our takeaway.
What do we do? Yeah, what do we do? Like didn't you tell the story about Nosferatu about
Yes,
it's
I
a
did.
Miracle we have
it's
that
a miracle
movie.
we have it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's not unique to this technology, right? That's a problem of art generally. Moby Dick, for example, classically, like almost disappeared, and then
Oh, I
somebody
didn't know
brought it
this.
back. Yeah, that's another sort
book?
of like the book. Yeah, arguably the greatest American novel ever written almost disappeared from sight entirely.
What is this? I don't know this story. Or can you tell it quickly?
It's I can't really I don't remember it off the top of my
You mean
head, but
somebody had it that didn't
no,
wasn't sharing it?
it was published and all of that stuff. It just almost vanished from sight. Like people didn't, a lot of stuff is
Oh,
published,
I
right?
see.
And
Yeah.
just it takes
Out of print
some distance to like recognize something as a work of genius. Sometimes, at the time it was very much in line with his other sort of adventure stories like Taipei and Omu or whatever. Like, but it was much longer, right? And it sort of like didn't hit as well. It was a total failure in the market. And I think it was like I want to say like 40 or 50 years later. That doesn't seem right. I have to go and look, but I read about this, at one point because somebody was making the argument for some other books, of like, well, I mean, there should be publishers who try to find these books, and publish them and keep them alive because there are novels out there that are worth reading that get lost, and who knows which ones they are, right? I mean, you have to spend a lot of effort and really make a passionate plea for them, which is what happened with Moby Dick, is that an individual found, rediscovered it, some period after it had been published. And I do think it's like in the 40, 50 year kind of time scale, but, and like really went to bat for it and had it reissued. But that was a person, I think, who maybe even worked in publishing. Like more details are starting to come back to me. Like it was somebody who was already
who had the capability.
Who basically had the ability to do it. And I think that was the cri de coeur of this author I was reading, who was like, publishers should be doing this. It's like there's gold out there that we didn't recognize when it came out.
Right, revisiting that stuff. Yeah, I mean, as a lot of the listeners know, my wife is in publishing or is a published author, and one of her one of her books is technically out of print now because it didn't do as well, so the copies are dwindling. But just as a close to home kind of example of like, the thing is now digitally you can always get it, right?
So right, yeah.
Physical copies are really, but not that we're totally off track, but we've been watching the show Emily, that is that sort of, I think, quite cool, like retelling of Emily Dickinson's life in a TV show, kind of almost
Oh,
Dark
yeah.
Way
I've heard. Yeah, I've heard
with
of it. Yeah.
with oh shoot, I'm blanking on her name, Haley Steinfeld.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
Yeah, she's
I
really
like
good.
her from True Grit.
But yeah, but for exactly, but the thing that I'm bringing it up is Jen knew this because she's a big fan of Emily Dickinson's work, but I didn't know actually the journey and the story about how her poems were discovered and how
Oh, yeah.
they were hidden,
Yeah.
and people
Another
found them.
classic. Yeah.
Yeah, and that just how like and there was sounds like some family shenanigans going on there, but eventually they were brought out and found and on these whatever scraps of paper in this trunk, and
And
to have
and arguably the most important American poet as well.
exactly that was like these poems she was writing on a whim almost that she was squirreling away inside some under some clothes that almost never
Never saw the light of day.
yeah, I don't know,
it's
for games
something like, I want to say it's like 80% or more films before 1920 are lost. They're just gone. There's because of the technology of the day, right? They were on prints that were, I guess, acetate or something. I mean, they
that sounds
disintegrate
right.
or they burn easily, right?
Yeah,
Same thing had with a lot of master recordings. In the I forget who the which music producer lost all this stuff, but like a warehouse burned and like all these masters were lost. That was just like in the last decade or so. Like, so these things happen where things get lost, and it's sad. Preservation's a real problem,
well, you mentioned that
especially in
film.
commercial art, I should say.
Yeah, we talked about this in the preservation topic. So it feels like somewhat recently, maybe because of the charity event, but it was because it was Phil's interview, right? And then some questions popped up, I think during the stream, and sort of like the call to arms of like, what are you going to do about it, and then think you or somebody had brought up this sort of, or we both had talked about the convergence of business and preservation, because preservation often doesn't mean business to companies, so they're not incentivized to do it, right? There has to be another motivation for them to actually spend the money to do it. But the statistic you gave about the pre 1920s films, 80% being lost, isn't that the same statistic that Phil's group came up with in their research?
Yeah. I mean, it might be partly that I'm,
I'm not. I'm not saying that's. I'm saying that's. I'm not surprised.
It's a lot. I mean, it might even be more with film, but I know it was a very high number, and every time
it's a high number.
I'm like, how can it be? Like that is so many, films.
That's that's our destiny, right? And so, anyway, obviously, I'm spinning and tap dancing here on the fact that I didn't really get to play, but we're kind of spinning it into an important topic that we're going to continue coming back to. That I never anticipated for this podcast, because I was like, we're going to play classic games. They're always going to be easy to get to, right? And it's like not always the case. So, what is the crux of this particular problem? We've gotten some new information.
We have. So we got an email. So one of our Discord members, another plug for the Discord, I think he goes by Carlos in the Discord as well. And apologies if I have that wrong. That's my recollection. He wrote in. This is from Carlos. And he says physics in Interstate 76, and he puts in parentheses again. I know because we've had a lot of discussions in the Discord, a few weeks ago when we were first starting about, I think it was after the first episode, and since I hadn't really planned to talk about it in depth that night, I was like, thinking through it. I was like, usually you would think a faster machine would be better for physics, but I know sometimes not, because I was trying to talk through all my issues. We all kind of discussed it. And, well, it turns out, and I'll start reading here. He says, I've been enjoying the conversations. He says hello. I've been enjoying the conversations regarding Interstate 76's vehicle physics, so I decided to dive a bit more into the subject. I had an idea that maybe one of the original developers had posted some write-up online, so I searched through the credits and found something much better. It turns out that I have a loose work connection with Julio Jerez. It's Jerez, so it could be Jerez or Jerez, probably Jerez. The graphics programmer in Interstate 76, who also helped on the, as he calls it, game's pseudophysics. I reached out to him, and he was happy to discuss many of the development details he remembered from the project, as well as consented to share them with the podcast. I'll leave his. Okay, I'll skip over that. His explanations will be much better than any summary I could write, so I will not alter them. Still, I think they may benefit from some form of context, and I'll try my best at providing one. Please keep in mind that my understanding of the subject is superficial at best. I'll rely on Brett to correct any inaccuracies. That is maybe not a good strategy, by the way. I am not going to go try to
I do that every day.
Yeah. The models used to simulate real-time 3D physics rely on differential equations. I can confirm that's likely, whose behavior can change rapidly because of factors such as collisions, joint constraints, and so on. Because of this, the numerical methods used to solve them have to be very carefully chosen and tuned so as not to accumulate errors over time. One of the ways to increase the stability of these systems is by reducing the duration of the simulation step, increasing the frame rate. However, like Brett said, the computational rounding errors soon become an issue. Even with a carefully chosen time step, most methods, and especially the ones in a machine in 1997 would be able to compute in real time, require additional tuning to ensure stability specific to the time step chosen for the simulation. This is why physics engines tend to opt for a fixed time step update, which is often a multiple or independent from the game's frame rate. In the case of Interstate 76, this target time step was 1/15 of a second. However, the frame rate was never capped, which at the time meant that the game could run anywhere between 10 to 20 frames per second, depending on the machine, which was still within the acceptable range for their simulation. Anything beyond 30 frames per second would make their numerical methods behave in unexpected manners, but that wasn't a realistic issue at the time. Yeah, so basically, there weren't any machines that could run this game at 30 frames a second in 1997, so it kind of was a non-issue, at least at the time. So here's Julio's explanation. Oh, and I want to point out too that things that you could do today were also not available to programmers in 1997, like threads and things like that. The overhead on switching the context to run a thread, if it was even possible, like it probably wasn't possible in 95 for a game. Might have been, but unlikely a technique you'd use because the cost to using one was so high. It was really expensive to do those things, so you couldn't just just run the physics at a different resolution. You could have capped the frame rate, I guess, but that was not a selling point of games. Capped at 30 frames per second. Anyway, here's Julio's explanation. Yes, I was the graphics programmer for Interstate 76. Many games thereafter used my old software rasterizer graphics library. When I joined Activision, the MechWarrior 2 engine was quite limited in terms of rendering features for i76. I offered my rasterizer, and they ended up replacing the majority of the graphics of the MechWarrior 2 engine, renaming it the Dark Side engine. The main game logic part remained untouched. Many of the technical staff refused to modify it because they were proud of MechWarrior 2 and its derivatives. The vehicle physics in Interstate 76 actually stems from the MechWarrior physics. The cars were adapted from the mechs, and the lead programmer on this was Daniel Stanfield. I contributed by adding physics elements like tire suspension, which they struggled to stabilize. To fix this, I implemented a second-order digital filter. I worked extensively on the game's pseudophysics. However, as I recall, the physics was not independent of the time step. Everything ran in the same loop, which was common for games back then. Yeah, that's what I was addressing before. The game was designed to run at 15 frames per second. Anything faster was considered a bonus. I don't even think it had a VSync cap, though I might be wrong, as there were many updates and changes after I moved on to other projects. It's no surprise on a very fast machine, the game doesn't run properly. But that's a moot point unless the source code is ever released. Don't hold your breath. I'll just go and put that out there now. I followed up to ask about the time step. This is Carlos again. I followed up to ask about the time step and any particular physics constraint methods used. He says, yes, the time step is not regulated, or at least it wasn't on the release project. There's no constraint physics of any kind in the game. So that is to clear up what I said was maybe there was a constraint on the joints, like so that the tires could break off. It sounds like that was done in a different way. And not what's called a constraint for anybody who's programmed a physics engine. The suspension of the car is just a second order digital filter. That is, it samples the terrain height, applies that as an input of an equation, y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. X is the relative elevation height. A, B, and C are calculated to resonate at 15 hertz. It'll be okay in between 10 and maybe 30 hertz. Once you pass that sample rate, it's just a low pass filter. The output is just the C constant. This fits in with Brett's experience. This is back to Carlos again. This fits in with Brett's experience across slopes. The shorter the time step, the smaller the sampled elevation gain will be in its simulation step. With high enough frame rates, the elevation gain values are zeroed out in the equation above, which leads to the suspension of the car being tied to a simple constant value, resulting in jittery physics. I'm sure there's more gems inside Julio's brain, but I'm clearly out of my depth on the subject, and I felt bad asking for more. I hope, however, this was insightful information. And he says, thanks for the read. Yeah, thanks for that, Carlos. I think we were
amazing
with discussion in the Discord and sort of thinking through the issues. I think a lot of us were finally kind of also, zeroing in on a solution to what was going on in this particular problem. Because, for me, it's also been nearly 30 years since I was programming in machines of this era. And I literally forget, it's just like hard to remember what it was like. As I was discussing here, like, I think maybe they had some kind of, thread. They obviously had threads, because Windows 95 was a truly threaded, operating system. Whereas, Windows 3.1 was cooperative multi-threading and stuff like that, which were a problem. Anyway, interesting stuff to think about.
That's amazing. Thank you, Carlos, for doing that, and it is a great plug for the Discord as well. That kind of insight, that he would not have been somebody we would have been able to find.
That
probably for an interview. So that kind of detail is going to be.
Yeah, and having a personal connection is always helpful.
Yeah,
so just to reach out and say, "Hey, tell us what happened there." So, that was super super cool. It was just he said his final. He had some notes that were like not necessarily for sharing, but he said, that's like 30 years old stuff. No one really cares. In fact, I think if anything, anyone will be glad someone is resurrecting such a dead horse. So that's what Julio had to say about this game. Yeah. I will say as creators, we do like it when people are checking out our games, when even after some time, like we talked about with the stream with Jedi Starfighter. It's fun. But anyway, that's
he never saw that coming.
No, he did not see that coming. Yeah. I'm
you
sorry,
what? What are you asking about? Who is this?
Yeah. So
why are you bothering me?
Yeah, why are you bothering me about this? Yeah, it was cool that it was also talking about the rasterizer. So that's basically the way that you put the polygons on screen in software. Instead of letting the hardware do it, because there were both for this game. So it was very common at the time to use software rasterizers for things. I think Quake still had one. Certainly, I think before Quake would have had a software rasterizer. I'm trying to think of what we've played that would have had a software rasterizer. Maybe Ultima Underworld. Tomb Raider has software rasterizer for sure. Yeah.
It was that era where their
exactly. It was the
hardware acceleration was happening.
Yep, it was just starting to happen.
Kind of had to support both Trespasser.
Oh yeah, of course, Trespasser.
Yeah.
Thank God we brought that one back up.
Drink.
Yep. Okay. Well, I guess we'll go on a little bit, unless you have more you want to discuss.
No, that's my admission on air.
Okay.
I feel like I put the effort in, and
you did. You definitely did.
I basically just at some point I had to throw in the towel, and
I just assumed it was going to be you skipped a small step that ended up having big repercussions. So when we went through all the steps together, and you were like very patient because I was like, well, you do this, and then you'd be like, yeah, but don't I do this first? I was like, oh yeah, you clearly have done this a few times,
Yeah.
because I was
No,
like,
but the second set of eyes is always good.
yeah,
and,
no, it's
and Brett knows I do often miss steps.
Yeah.
I don't read instructions well.
But it was wild to me that on 3 separate machines you could not, that this would work. So it's
yeah, in my deep dive, because the other thing that happens when you're doing this, because there was the two literally, these, we're talking about forums, not like Reddit. We're just talking about old school forums, 2 forum posts that we found. One of them was actually, I guess maybe it's not a forum, but it was on GitHub.
oh right, yeah.
And so, but my point is that, which kind of relates to the macro topic here of when those 2 didn't work, and one of them was because one of the applications they wanted to use was a license. I wasn't going to buy a license. So maybe that would have worked if I bought a license. I don't know, but I wasn't going to do that. Anyway, it also seemed shady to me.
Yeah.
But what it did is it sent me down the hole of, when you Google search getting anything like this to work, you're going to come up with other people with the same problem. And the variety of different versions of this problem that everyone was having, and it did seem to be machine specific. Like people were always sharing their specs, and then it kind of just reminds me of PC compatibility testing.
Oh yeah,
which I remember from the LucasArts days. The compatibility lab at LucasArts was really good and really astounding. And you walk in there and they have, walls of cards, video card, whatever, like, and all these different PCs. And there's certain PCs that were like these gems because they needed to test games on them to make sure they worked, even though they were obsolete, or you know what I mean? So it just, once you start down that rabbit hole, you realize, that how many different,
it's a giant house of cards that we've built our
the possibilities of failure are so high.
I have been trying to find a bug this week that is hardware specific.
Oh yeah, I know the one you're talking about.
Yeah. So it's like
super bummer.
It's still today, and I'm trying to find, well, is there some data that this particular card, which is just a little different from the card I actually have. Of course, it's not happening on my machine, so it makes it that much more difficult because we're a fully remote studio. So I can't just go and do all the things I would do on a machine to look at different things. Like, I have to do it through a remote desktop sharing kind of situation, and have them drive, etc., to try to figure things out. When I'm not working on debugging directly on my own machine, sometimes I can go look at somebody else's machine and say, well, let's go see what your event viewer is telling me or whatever. And it's like remembering all these things while not actually doing it myself, and like watching somebody do it it's both slow and maddening. So it's
lucky for you, this team member is an ex-QA person.
Yes, definitely.
So they understand.
Very helpful. Yeah,
they understand.
Yeah, she's extremely patient, and she's willing to try stuff, and we talk through things. And I got more data tonight, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to wake up in the middle of the night tonight with an idea. So if I'm tired tomorrow, it's your fault. But thank you for the data. So
yeah.
All right. Well, let's run down a few things I made.
What have you been up to?
Yeah, I didn't play, so I didn't want to get even further ahead of you. Assuming you were going to get it working.
Yeah.
I was like, well, I'll just play a couple because I know he's only played like 2 or 3 or whatever it was, and so I think I only got out to mission, I think 10. Possibly 11. I'd have to go.
You're over halfway now, though.
I am over halfway, and I'll finish it because I am enjoying it. And the biggest part of enjoyment, because I was struggling. I will say, I had a mission that I mentioned I had some difficulty with. There was a timer, and it was very frustrating to get that going. I had tried it several times, and I got to that point finally. And anyway. So then I hooked up the flight stick. And this game is great with a flight stick. It's so good. It feels really good. I mean,
I'm jealous.
Yeah, the flight stick's honestly is a little we don't play a lot of flight stick games, and so I'm always like, I forget how like stiff the flight stick can be.
Yeah,
Just like,
yeah,
it's like it's and I'm steering with it, right? So it's like, it is really like, yeah, I mean, it'd be really good with a driving wheel, I bet, if you had a good driving wheel back in the day. But yeah, I mapped it all out. The number one thing that I found really helpful was that I only had to move the one axis of the joystick to steer left and right instead of accelerating as well, which, with the controller is what I was doing before. So I think what was happening is when I was pushing anything other than the canonical directions,
I know what
I
you're gonna
was
say.
I was
Yeah.
not getting as much, right? So it was like,
Yep.
I was getting like 0.8 because I was pointing kind of, off to the right a little bit because I wanted to still accelerate while I was turning. And
Yeah.
when I moved to the stick, and I could literally just set the throttle and just peg it at a point where I wanted it to be, and then manipulate it directly. Perfect. So
Yeah.
that
That's
made the
good
game go
feedback
really
for
well.
anybody who does play on a controller. That's good feedback in that you should unmap the acceleration on the up of the stick,
Yeah.
right? And just have it on a button or something.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
then only use left and right on the stick for turning.
Well, and the thing is that the stick has I guess my stick has four axes, because it's got a throttle, it's got a twist, which I think they call rudder usually. So there's throttle and rudder, and then the two directions of the stick itself. So it has the same four axes that two sticks on a controller do. But the problem with controllers, post 360 and, obviously some others, is that they have analog triggers. So the input system treats those as axes, and it doesn't let you bind it to a lot of the game's inputs. So you can't shoot, for example, with an axis. You have to have a button, and it treats, so it,
Oh, whoa. I didn't
right. I mean,
anticipate that.
yeah, so that was a big thing with the controllers, that I was essentially losing two of the primary things that you usually are using with a controller, which is the two big triggers, right? L2 and R2.
Yeah.
So when I now had like a however many button, 12 or 16 button thing, it was like, oh, it's way easier to map a bunch of things now. It's like I can use the hat, which is basically four buttons. Even though you can't press them simultaneously, I was like, oh, now I can do all the look stuff. So I could finally see my arm sticking out the window with my gun, or look out the back. I had, the three of the axes, and then the trigger, and then there's a button under your thumb. I forget what that one's called, but it's button 2 or whatever. So your trigger is just a button instead of a axis, instead of analog. And so I could use that to shoot. I could use the other one to switch. I have 4 buttons around the hat. Yeah, so I've got a ton of buttons. It's ridiculous, those controllers. And then I
There's a
use
lot
those
of
for like
commands, though.
targeting. Oh yeah, there was a bunch of stuff. I can't, but I have no buttons for the poems.
You can just press the keyboard if you need
I
to.
can, if I really need a poem, I can hit the C key.
How many poems are there? Do you know?
I have no idea, but I'll look that up because that would be good to know. Now
I mean, I guess the voice
yeah.
files are there someplace.
Yeah, I could go listen to them all individually. I'm sure they're in some, packed data file that is specific to, this project or this engine, because everybody wrote their own packaging, at the time. So we had our own for the Starfighter games. We had our own pack file format. Everybody had them. Which is a whole nother question. Anyway, so the game was also way easier. I mean, I was already playing on the easiest mode because I knew, playing with a keyboard with a billion keys and like something I haven't played something like in a long time, I was going to want it to be easy. So I was playing on the easy mode already. But then once I actually had easy control over the throttle and I just had this big stick to turn with, I had way more precision because of the huge amount of throw on the stick. And it just became way easier. So a lot of things I did like the first time, so it was pretty good. It's pretty
good. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's now. Yeah. I mean, like I said, it makes me jealous to, before I had gone down the technical dark hole that I did start looking up how easy it would be for me to quickly get a wheel,
Oh
driving
boy.
wheel,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
because I was like, man, that probably is just the best
Yeah.
for this game. But,
Yeah, if you had a bunch of easily accessible buttons so that like you didn't even have to take your hands off of it, it would be pretty great. I think. Or if you had like I think there was very common at the time to have a split like a throttle and a throttle or gear shifter type thing and a wheel. I think that was a pretty common combo. Like with one, where two wires feeding into the USB or whatever. Or something like that. But anyway, um, I will talk a little bit too about the mission design because one of the things I've noticed now that the difficulty isn't an issue, and this actually might change on higher difficulties because I haven't kind of thought about how they manage difficulty. I could probably go back and start a new game and try that. I don't think you can just change the difficulty on the fly, so I'd have to kind of compare. But one of the things that makes the easy mode easy might be that there are fewer enemies. Because I've noticed like that they're doing a lot with a very few cars. Like that there are events happening, but there's not like a ton of cars there that you have to fight in those events. So, for example, you've got to guard a building, like in that early mission that you've been able to do with the diner.
yeah,
There's like 2 or 3 cars involved in that, not like 8. So it's they're getting a lot of mileage out of a few cars, and because of that, those cars have to stay alive longer.
Did you just say that?
What did I say? Oh, a lot of mileage. I did. Sorry,
Okay.
I didn't even mean to say that,
and you even missed it, which
I
is
didn't even notice that I said that. Yeah, so like they have to get a lot out of those cars, and that actually makes the cars seem smarter because they last longer from your attacks, right? So there's like a lot that kind of goes along that makes it feel like a deeper, richer world than it is. That is the smoke and mirrors of it all. Because they're cars and not people, for example, they don't have animation tells that make you go, "Oh, that's strange." You don't look at it and think a car shouldn't be able to do that. I mean, it is simulated. It's simulated physics and everything. So, the cars are doing things that cars should be able to do. So it all feels, even if you were, you're a real car expert or whatever, you look at it, they're not doing anything impossible, right? But they also they're just cars. So they don't have a lot of extra movement in them that you look at and say, well, that's not realistic, right? So there's all these things that are fitting together to make it, to make the drivers seem smarter.
Especially coming off of a mech series, where you have legs and arms and things.
Exactly.
But it's really fascinating that it's almost like they, from a simulation problem perspective, they took a step in an easier direction, I would think.
Yeah, I think so.
As far as just like moving parts, of course, like I'm sure tires are harder, but the driving model is
and the suspension and all that. Yeah,
but still, it's not like it's still like mostly a static, object that is moving around,
right?
Which is kind of a fascinating, and that is one of, not that I don't actually know if we're doing takeaways this episode.
I mean, we can. We're not going to do official takeaways for this series. We're going to probably call it tonight. We might still do interviews.
I have a couple thoughts that's one of them is related to that. There are I think 15 poems, by the way.
Oh, thank you for looking that up. So, 15 poems, like 15 syllables in a haiku. No, that's not how many syllables in a haiku. So it was super cool kind of being able to reflect on that once I was, able to certainly overseeing more missions, but also like identifying why it felt like it was enough. Like I could, because when I got back, stood back from it as a developer, I was like, okay, I just fought 6 cars, but I felt like, or maybe not even, maybe 5 cars in one of the missions. And it's like, but I still felt like I had a whole little story that happened. And part of it is the voiceover, but a lot of it is just the way they section up that combat is like, well, you're gonna fight this one car coming in who's like the lookout, and then you're gonna fight another car who's gonna come up behind you and be like a chase car. That's kind of gives some variability. But what it really boiled down to was not the sort of narrative of the mission, but more that like it felt like I was fighting real guys out in the desert, in a car, which I was really surprised to find working.
We probably talked about this with the TIE Fighter series, I would bet, because at least for myself and I guess somewhat, well, no, I mean, it applies to Starfighter and Jedi Starfighter for both of us.
Yeah.
The con, I think, to your point, the thing that people doesn't always maybe come to people's minds is that, we talk about level design, and level design is maybe a little bit easier to understand because of the geometry of it. Right, is it's like, oh, we're designing a level. At least in that era, you were doing kind of almost all level designers were doing almost everything, right? For a Quake or something like that, right? They're building geometry. They're probably placing enemies, whatever. They're orchestrating the flow of it, especially for a linear game. But for a flight game and for a car game, I would assume, mission design is what we would call it. And there is another different art form to that, right? Like, because you're not building the geometry. I mean, you're probably designing the general space and maybe the layout of the terrain. But to your point, there's a pacing and a rhythm to the enemies, and if you're in space, you have no geometry.
Yeah.
So you're having
a lot of fake space junk to.
You're trying to
orchestrate. You're moving.
Right, you're trying to orchestrate pacing and drama, and crescendos and things with just when are ships flying in, and which ones,
and some voice, right?
Yeah. And voice. No, I mean it's still a very my point is it's like you don't have very many tools to make something compelling, but in TIE Fighter they did a great job, and here it sounds like they're doing a good job with, it's constraints, right? Like they have very few options. How do they make it feel dramatic and still be because I think the games that don't succeed as much at that with mission, quote unquote, mission design, every mission tends to feel the same.
Yeah.
And I think the Wing Commander series, specific ones, were very good, and I think that generally it's a good series. My memory of the Wing Commander series is that there were some of the games very repetitive as far as missions were concerned. So you can definitely, it's easy to mess those up too. So giving them kudos for that feeling.
Yeah, with Wing Commander, not that we're talking about Wing Commander, but another thing I think that kind of bit them there is that they had all that narrative that they wanted to do that was between the missions. With the FMV, and things like that. So like, and I think in earlier ones maybe it was animation. I don't know. I only played like Wing Commander 4 or something. And my recollection is like, well, a lot of that padding had to be in there to give space for the rest of the story to play out. So like they had to like hide the fact that they basically had a 20-minute movie they wanted to play you, but they had to break it up into, whatever 15 or 30-second chunks.
You still needed a 10-hour game or something.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. So they had a lot of missions that were, just like enough to fill the space till the next reward, which was the movie, which was a lot of how we thought about, game rewards at the time. Getting the cool animation or whatever was going to be part of the rewards. Anyway, I had one final note, which was sometimes the humor lands a little differently than intended. Certainly this game has tons of style, and there's a lot of stuff I love just about the sort of the 1976 funk vibe of it all. But in one of these late missions, you come to a roadblock and you're instructed to slow down by a police car. There are like 4 there, and then most of the mission ends up being running away from the cops. You have to get out of there. You're in a roadblock, so you actually have to reverse out, and it's in like this tiny little box canyon. So you have to back out and then run, the whole time. But you hit a dead end because your map says there's a road there, but there's not anymore. So you got to back out. They've blocked off the way you came in, blah, blah, blah. But the funny thing was, as you pull up, you get a cutscene of the trooper calling you out, and telling you to turn yourself over and give up your vehicle and all that stuff. And he's doing a George H.W. Bush impression. The voice actor or whomever, maybe somebody on the team, who knows. And it was just so, like, I was thinking back to like 1997, like George Bush impression, a George H.W. Bush impression, really, in 1997? Like, that's 5 years after his, presidency. I don't know. It's just really funny. I don't think Dana Carvey was even still on Saturday Night Live in 1997, so he wasn't even doing it anymore. I just thought it was hilarious, but and there's a lot of it. It's extremely long of him talking. So he's saying these things on, and then he's in like the rest of the mission a little bit. I have a feeling he's going to come back, so I'll report in some other series if that does happen. But it was a moment that I thought was extremely funny.
Well, it's a good call out that when you definitely have time-based humor.
Yeah.
When you play something so much later, it's out of context. It's gonna.
I mean, it was funny just in a different way. It was just like, what?
Yeah.
It was just very. I mean, it was a decent impression, So.
Well, also, who that impression is of.
Right,
there
that's true.
Plenty of people who would play that and not even think twice about it.
That's very true. Yep. So I would just say, in terms of my work going forward, impressions, not going to do it.
Yeah, exactly. That's the famous. Once you say that, you know who you're talking about. Yeah.
Wow. Yep. Thank you very much.
Good work.
Yep. It's been a long time since I've thought of Dana Carvey's George H.W. Bush impression. It was a simpler time. All right. Well, I guess we're kind of at the end here. You said you had some stuff about takeaways, some sort of unofficial takeaways if you want to.
Yeah,
I haven't thought about it or prepped it at all. I mean,
well, I just wanted to make a couple really, I'd say it's probably reiteration of some things that I've already said from a couple, we had 2 episodes before this.
Yes, that's right.
It's such a blur.
It's a blur.
Yeah. Anyway, but yeah, despite me not really getting to play the game the way that it should be played, one of the reasons I just wanted to reiterate as takeaways that I wanted to play the game, and I still hope we can, as weird as this series has been, we should still be able to get guests on if we want to do it. So we'll talk about that offline. But the commitment to a bold stylistic identity is so admirable, because I think that, people I think MechWarrior is a franchise that the nerds know, the FASA IPs, the tabletop miniature stuff, I think there was pen and paper as well.
There was. Yeah.
Like MechWarrior is a pretty, and of course there's a great anime related to this too. And there's still some modern. In fact, there was a MechWarrior game that came out not long ago, last few years. So it's still around, but it's a very niche, and I think it was just a bold maneuver to go from that franchise. And I don't know the history. Maybe they lost the IP or something, so they had to pivot. But to take a foundation and think of something so iconically recognizable for those who know this game, which we heard from the audience, people didn't know it. A lot of people were like, what is this?
Yeah, definitely some people who did, though. So.
But there's some people who did. That's my point, that this is like, oh, Interstate 76. That is a very recognizable, specific game. If you know it, you're like, instantly, you're like, oh yeah, that game.
Right.
And that is hard to do in a sea, especially in the 90s, the late 90s, where all the games, so much licensed stuff, so much stuff was similar, like all the Quake clones and all the, Duke clones and all the, all the FPSs just in general, right? Like, you start naming their names and you're like, they all blend together into one game.
Yeah.
But you can't do that with this game. This game is like, this is that 70s car game.
Yeah.
That's very pulpy, very recognizable characters, stereotypes, but recognizable, et cetera, et cetera. And so I just wanted to reiterate that point and call it out.
They're in on the joke about the stereotypes. They're purposefully choosing the same, blaxploitation versus the karate stuff like you talked about.
Yeah.
They're deliberately pulling from that. That's inspiration. This stuff is
They're
homage.
self-aware.
They
Yeah.
very much know what they're doing, right? And
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and that I also like the vibe for me was like, yeah, I mean, there was a reason why I was thinking of this game. I was like, yeah, that's one I really feel like I missed out on. I wish I had played, and I've gotten to, so I feel like I can cross that one off the list. But it was one that I, thinking back on, I was like, yeah, I really regret that I didn't play it back then. I don't know why, just that I was, busy moving across the country, I guess really is what it comes down to is, because I started, soon after this game came out, and was winding down my academic career and all that stuff. So,
Yeah.
it just wasn't the right time, and it just happened to be that way.
But
So
But to that point, it's stuck in your memory, right? Because
yeah, yeah,
it
for
was
sure.
recognizable, right?
Yeah.
Versus like I'm just picking a random one, but like the FPS Blood,
Yep.
it's like yeah, okay,
Right.
and that
Yeah.
that was the same people that did a few others, like what was that called, Shadow something,
Yeah.
Shadow Warrior maybe.
Warrior. Yeah.
So anyway, that the kind of some of those old like definitely niche FPS franchises. They're like, yeah, but who, no one's going to. I mean, people will remember them. I'm not saying that they're not good games, but you know what I'm saying. These
Yeah. Yeah.
stand out.
Yeah.
And then the second sub point that's related to that, just really quick to reiterate, is knowing when a franchise winds down like MechWarrior, having been in the situation to some degree where you're like, okay, we need to do the next thing, but we have this thing. How do you pivot to something that is a new IP, that's your own IP, that will be the company's own IP, that leverages everything that you have from the other one, but is a true pivot?
Yeah. Total
And
distinct thing. Yeah.
that is very admirable as well. To go from MechWarrior to this, a car combat 70s game, set in Texas, it's like all of the setting was important because of the rendering, the cars were important because it was, focusing the way that they were going to build the game, but it had to still be a sim because they're building off of MechWarrior. So all of those decisions that go into migrating to a new game and a new IP and a new gameplay, but still staying in the genre, that's another admirable shift that is very hard to do.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I think because I remember us at the time being more like, we want to go do some different genre. Like after we did a thing,
Yeah,
that was normally it happened a lot with engineers, especially were able to move around at LucasArts to different genres. Although at the time there was a lot more like third person action starting to happen, I think, all at once. I mean, maybe it just feels that way now. But we also had like, Gladius or whatever, which was like Final Fantasy Tactics style, tactical combat game. And like Red Rock or, and adventure game because Sam and Max was going at that time or whatever. Like these games were all kind of getting built at the same time we were either finishing Dead Surfer Fighter or working on Republic Commando. And it was like, as an engineer or an artist, like you could move around to a bunch of different genres in a lot of different styles at LucasArts, but it was rare for a team to stick together and, like you say, pivot to something. I mean, it was less rare, I guess, for the adventure game. They could really
right.
kind
The
of do something
adventures are,
different.
maybe more,
More able to do that. But there, that's so narratively driven that it's like, well, okay, you come up with this, this story idea, and you just you use this tool to make that story, which was true of text adventures as well, prior to the graphic adventures. So it was
I mean, I have
cool.
a very personal example.
Yeah, please.
From LucasArts, my time there. First game I tested, you know what it is.
Oh, I
You've
do.
made joke about it.
I have.
Going from Rebel Assault,
the riddles of the medallion.
Yeah, going from Rebel Assault to Mortimer and the Riddles of the Medallion. That is a pivot that I'll never forget. I will never forget that theme song.
And the MIDI snail game, I remember you once saying. So I can remember exactly the way you said it. It was hilarious.
I wonder if I played because there's like trivia in that, because it's an edutainment kind of thing. So
right,
like asking kids questions about animals and stuff. I wonder if I'd remember any of that. I should go back and find that game, see if I can play it.
You should. Yeah, I'm sure it's on Abandonware, and there's probably a forum post somewhere
Oh
to
no.
explain how to
I
how
take
to
it
get
back.
it to
I
run.
don't want to. I don't want to do
You
it.
don't want to ride that snail anymore. All right, let's. We have time for email. We are actually going to end up having basically a full episode tonight, so I'm going to have you do email 1. I'll take email 2 afterwards. The second one I sent you.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah, because
All right.
I
Yeah.
didn't think that through at the time.
Yeah, we weren't sure if we were going to go short this time because of
Yeah.
my shenanigans. Yeah, and maybe in the future I'll do more due diligence before we commit.
Yeah.
Okay, so email 1, subject Interstate 76. Speak of the devil. Somebody who remembers. Hello. Oh, this is from Wes. Hello. Thank you for highlighting this game! Exclamation point. It was so on point and well done, and it is a shame not enough people enjoyed it. Unfortunately, it was later remade on consoles as Vigilante 8. Really? Which
Yeah,
led
I'll
to
talk
it.
about that because I looked into this a little bit.
Oh, okay. Which led to it being seen as a Twisted Metal clone and was then forgotten about. The PC was definitely where it needed to be played. Oh, it wasn't a PC game. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, it was a
Yes,
console,
this sounds like
PlayStation 1.
this sounds like Activision shenanigans to me.
Yeah.
One of the best parts of this game was the online multiplayer, which was a blast, and I hope you two are able to get that to work with a few others. Oh, Wes. Oh, Wes. While this could benefit from a remaster, my hope would be for the original developers to do a full remake with today's physics engines while still keeping it stylized. I happen to know some of those. Let's see.
Yeah,
I think
see what they
I'm
think.
guessing this is tied up somewhere in legal. Also, there are some pedigree with those who made the music that you should look into. Anyway, glad to hear you're enjoying the game. Thanks again, Wes, DFW.
I think Dallas, Fort Worth. I think that's where it's
Got it.
located.
Okay.
So I looked into this a little bit. So it is kind of loosely. Vigilante 8 is loosely related. It was set in 70. It is set sort of in the same place. They basically took the setting and the rough story and wrote a new engine for the consoles. So it's not the engine at all. Like it's a new game, right, with the same, fiction, right?
Spirit.
So yeah, so the same sort of spirit, but it was not the same game at all. And in fact, another LucasArts connection for you. I don't know if you remember Star Wars Demolition.
Oh yeah, totally. Oh yes,
that was the same team, the Luxaflux team, that did Vigilante 8, and they used the Vigilante 8 engine to do a Star Wars car combat game late in the PlayStation 1 era.
Oh man, I just had flashbacks on that game. Oh my god. Probably you're uttering it here. The audience is has no idea what that game is.
Yeah, no, it's. I mean, we're not going to be playing Demolition. Let me just put it that way. Apologies to anyone who worked on it that I know. Yeah, we had a few like that at the time. That when the company was trying to get into the consoles and figure out how to do that, and on PS1 they pretty well whiffed. I don't think they. I mean, it's funny because they had some good like SNES stuff. I think with like Zombies Ate My Neighbors or whatever, and
Super Star Wars wasn't bad.
Super Star Wars and Big Sky Trooper, I think was
that was Hal's game.
Hal's game.
Yeah, that was.
So anyway, yeah, I looked into it a little bit because I was like Vigilante, and then because I didn't know the story of Vigilante 8 at all, but I was like, I didn't think that was because I know we did a game with that engine at LucasArts, because I remember
wild.
that.
What a strange world.
But yeah, they did basically take the fiction and then re-implement. So it was a different game, right, entirely, and it was more like a Twisted Metal clone. So yeah, can't really say because I didn't play it. But thanks for writing in, Wes.
I assume that was Activision Vigilante 8.
It was Luxaflux, probably published by Activision.
Yeah. The reason I bring it up is that Twisted Metal was a pretty popular brand.
Yeah.
And Activision's MO at that has always been, what's popular. Let's make a competitor.
Let's make that
that is multi-platform, right?
Yeah,
because
it was published
Twisted Metal would have been PlayStation only. And so that was their we're we're going to try to get in on this.
Yes, Vigilante 8 was indeed published by Activision. It was Luxaflux was the developer, and it looks like it was basically formed to make this game, and then it was PlayStation, Nintendo 64, Game Boy Color. So the Game Boy Color would have been a third engine that was written for it. In fact, the Nintendo 64 version and the PlayStation version were probably pretty significantly different as well in terms of implementation. Anyway, let me find what happened to my window with the email. Oh, here it is. Catching up on DGC back episodes. So this one, it does come from something older, but I feel like there was a question in here that was maybe relevant, or it's maybe just nice to read. This is from Dave K. And he says, "G'day, Tim and Brett." So my second impression of the night, I guess. I'll start off this email by telling you about one of my favorite TV shows, Grand Designs. If you don't know, it's about people who set out to build grand, sometimes ridiculous, sometimes stunning houses, and the trials and tribulations that go along with it. In recent years, there's been a new trend in the show. We hear their ambitious plans, what they think it will cost, and then their projected timeline. And then the build starts and the date flashes up on screen. February 2020? Yeah, sorry guys, you have no idea about what's about to hit you. Why am I opening an email to Dev Game Club like this? Well, as a late arrival listener, I am making my way back through back episodes, and I hear that the podcast will be put on hold while a certain someone is off on an adventure of a lifetime.
Oh.
And then saw the date on the episode. Sorry about that, Tim. While I'm sure I'll find out in due course what happens while listening to the episodes, the fact that there isn't a noticeable gap tells me what's to come. It got me thinking about game dev being one of the few jobs possibly unaffected by the events of 2020. Oh, this is why I wanted to read this. And beyond, in that remote work seemed to be the norm before the pandemic. So I guess my question is, what, if anything, changed for you career-wise as a result of COVID? Apologies if this has been covered in the time since, but as someone whose livelihood was very much affected during lockdowns, etc., I'm curious about the experiences of others. Keep up the great work. I'm sure to catch up on back episodes one day. And then cheers, Dave K. Yeah, I mean, we weren't really remote. In fact, I remember once getting offered a lower salary to work remote on the basis of not believing I could do as good a job not being in the building. And there are some challenges to working remote.
Wow.
Yeah. It was a while back. I'll tell you about it offline or off mic because anyway, I don't want to give away more than that. But yeah, I mean, it was actually not common for us to work remote at the time. I mean, I was working remote, but it was not a common thing. Yeah.
Pretty much shunned, really.
Yeah. It was not looked on favorably.
I know. I would bring it up, and others would bring it up from time to time as a possibility, because there are people that, like myself, who had interest in it, but it was always poo-pooed.
Yeah, the theory is, like you have to be there, and there's some validity to sort of like the chance encounters that happen in hallways and things like that. I mean, I heard that a lot at Bethesda in particular, like, oh, it's because this person ran into that person getting coffee in the kitchen that, this came to be, and there's some truth to that. And there is some truth that it's, a very collaborative environment. And honestly, I in the end, I think it's really just about, wanting to look out upon all your workers and see them all at work. Is,
people,
what it comes down to.
Oh man. Yeah. Don't get us started on this, but yeah. So, I mean, I guess I don't know. This is
so
a deep hole.
Not getting us started on
another deep hole, but yeah. Sorry. I maybe interrupted you.
No. I was happy to hand it off. Please step in it.
Well, to answer the question, really, the easy part of the question really quickly, I had already basically been on a break because of my plans that he is alluding to.
Yeah.
Post Microsoft. So I was kind of, as far as what career change, the plan, which I think I've talked about, is that we had incorporated the company and technically started the company before So yeah, early 2020. And then I was going to go on the grand adventure, and then we were going to start the company in earnest and like, start making things after I got back. But then COVID hit, and I had to cancel that plan, and it has not happened, as you may know. Is Dave listening to the modern episodes as well, or is he going to hear this answer in 10 years?
Well, I would presume that he knows we've written. I'll reply and let him know. Hey,
Okay, yeah.
we answered this in
He might
424.
listen to this someday. But
Yeah,
anyway, yeah. So the way it changed, obviously, with my point is it drastically changed my career because we started a company and we decided, because of COVID, and as people know, well, may not know, I don't know, maybe not everybody knows this, but every studio that was trying to ship a game at the time, a lot of people who are at Twin Suns now, and a lot of colleagues were forced to work remotely, right, because of lockdown. So they, various games had to ship in lockdown, so they had to all go remote. So they had to figure it out. What that ended up doing is basically giving permission and proof that you can ship games that way. So the corporate folks could no longer use the excuse that you can't,
right.
that it's impossible, or it's very hard actually to justify that logic anymore. And so we decided with our company to make it fully remote. And one of the main motivations for that for us, which I believe is an advantage, to Brett's point, they both have validity. They both work, and they both have advantages. They both have pros and cons, but neither of them is unworkable. Anyone who says that one is better or one can't work is, I believe, wrong.
Yeah,
They're just different. They're just different. But because we've always been remote, you know, everyone knows that, right? And we have built all of our processes around it, et cetera, et cetera. And we feel like we found a pretty good rhythm, I think. But yeah, they gave us permission. So once we started, we're like, well, we're going to be remote, and the big advantage for us was we could work with whomever we wanted, right? We could
yeah. Around the
people
world.
people didn't have to move.
Yeah,
Like in the old days, is like if you're recruiting somebody, well, we have a relocation package. You have to move to Seattle, or you have to move to wherever,
yeah,
and that's mandatory. And it's like, well, now it's like, no, I don't want to move. my
yeah,
family's my
yeah.
family's here, so it's like,
I
well,
mean, as the
okay,
industry has gotten more mature, in terms of the workforce,
yeah,
it's been that much harder for, especially, like you're pointing out, senior people to move. And in
yeah,
fact, it's one of the real tragedies of an industry that is so, was thought to be something that had to be, in person, that when studios would shut down, it was like, well, now that whole team, all of them are upending their lives to go somewhere else unless they work in Austin, maybe Dallas, San Francisco, LA, Seattle area, a handful of places really. A little bit in Maryland, but it's only really a couple studios here. So maybe, but we couldn't absorb everybody from the Kingdoms of Amalur team when they shut down. I forget the name of that studio before it was acquired by 38, um but yeah, I mean, it's now it's kind of, I honestly think it's just kind of unforgivable. I mean, I get why they do it, in some ways. Like, well, we have this big expense, we have this building we're paying for that we've paid a
there's
lease for 30 years or whatever on, and
yeah,
so there are like business accounting concerns. And the other thing too is if you didn't start from remote, it can be hard to make that shift. People are used to working a certain way, and um, maybe there were subtle pressures on them that are not there now because I'm trying to dance around the topic a little bit, but like that there are sort of subtle social, pressures on people's work output because they're visible, that just disappear, when they're home, and you have to
there's
be able to
just
trust those people. You have to be able to
yeah,
trust your people to work remote. And I've definitely worked places where I felt like, oh, this person, who's somewhere in the chain above me doesn't trust the people.
yeah,
Maybe they trust me, but they maybe don't trust somebody else or whatever, and you see that happen, and you're like, well, if you don't trust the people, like, what are we doing here? That's always been kind of my feeling. It's like, you got to trust the people. And if you don't trust the people, like, there's no end of, there's no solution. If there's no trust, there's just no solution to whatever problem you're having.
And in person doesn't fix that.
It doesn't. No.
It's like, it's fear and trust based, to your point. Totally agree. And real estate, unfortunately, is one of the motivators. Often it feels like the studios that have gone hybrid. Now, maybe we're getting too in the rabbit hole on this, but those definitely have been, I think, struggling. So I do think it is an either or, probably. It's hard. I think it's harder to go hybrid, but at least we know what we are, and people come here knowing that, so I think a lot of studios are shifting and trying to figure out. They're trying to make the binary choice, right? And they're going to do one or the other, probably. Yeah. But it's hard for the people who had expectations change on them, right, in the middle of that. But yeah, trust has got to be it. And the truth of the matter is if you don't trust the team, putting them in a room isn't going to solve it. And there are also ways to solve it. There are ways to hold people accountable for work, and this whole paranoia that someone's at home not putting their all in, it's like, you can solve that, show it on screen, whatever. So anyway, it's a big, as you can tell, as a fully remote global studio, by choice, we have a lot of opinions.
We sure do. We sure do. Well, thank you for the emails to devgameclub@gmail.com. We ended up those.
I don't know how we did that episode. I don't know what happened.
Here we are. We got to the end of it. I wanted to remind folks that we are now, although maybe you didn't longer listen to the podcast because we weren't on the Google infrastructure, but we're now on YouTube. So if you listen to your podcast via YouTube and you've somehow heard it here, we are on YouTube now. I don't know. I don't know why I did it.
There is a sort of like
it's one subscriber, so it's like, okay. I was worried. Oh man, I'm gonna get all these, emails to the account, and I'm gonna have to go turn off all these notifications, and I have not. So it's been nice. I don't know what I thought was gonna happen. I did get a flood of spam.
It's a slow burn.
I got a bunch of like crypto garbage at first, but that apparently they figured out how to filter that out, or I don't know. Anyway. You can find us on the web at devgameclub.com, and you can find my co-host occasionally twitching at twitch.tv/
Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end. Should be good.
Are you going to be back? Okay, good.
Yeah. Not sure yet what, but we are. I think Lost Lake and more is probably hard at work on the Minecraft server, so that is at least coming. I'm not sure when.
Yeah. Well, you know where you can find out about that. On the Discord,
nice.
Which you have. We've mentioned several times in the episode. So go check that out. There's a link in the show notes. Our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton, commissioned by friend of the cast, Aaron Evers, and our logo, Discord, our merch store, all kinds of things by Mark Garcia. Have fun planning to buy an H-bomb this week, and good night.
What? Good night.